Self-inquiry. How is one to realize the self? Whose self? Find out. Mine, but who am I? Find out yourself. I don't know how. Just think over the question, who is it that says, I don't know? Who is the I in your statement? What is not known? Somebody or something in me. Who is that somebody? In whom? Perhaps some power? Find out. Why was I born? Who was born? The answer is the same to all your questions. Who am I then? You have come to examine me? You must say who you are. However much I may try, I do not seem to catch the I. It is not even clearly discernible. Who is it that says the I is not discernible? Are there two I's in you that one is not discernible by the other? Instead of inquiring, who am I, can I put the question to myself, who are you? Since then my mind may be fixed on you when I consider to be God in the form of Guru. Perhaps I would be nearer to the goal of my quest for that inquiry than by asking myself, who am I? Whatever form your inquiry may take, you must finally come to the one I, the self. All these distinctions made between the I and you, master and disciple, etc., are merely a sign of one's ignorance. The I, supreme, alone is. To think otherwise is to delude oneself. A Puranic story of sage Ribu and his disciple Nidaga is particularly instructive in this context. Although Ribu taught his disciple the supreme truth of the one Brahman without a second, Nidaga, in spite of his erudition and understanding, did not get sufficient conviction to adopt and follow the path of jnana, but settled down in his native town to lead a life devoted to the observance of ceremonial religion. But the sage loved his disciple as deeply as the latter venerated his master. In spite of his age, Ribu would himself go to his disciple in the town, just to see how far the latter had outgrown his ritualism. At times the sage went in disguise, so that he might observe how Nidaga would act when he did not know that he was being observed by his master. On one such occasion, Ribu, who had put on the disguise of a village rustic, found Nidaga intently watching a royal procession. Unrecognized by the town dweller, Nidaga, the village rustic, inquired what the bustle was all about, and was told that the king was going in procession. "Oh, it is the king. He goes in procession, but where is he?" asked the rustic. "There, on an elephant," said Nidaga. "You say the king is on the elephant." "Yes, I see the two," said the rustic, "but which is the king and which is the elephant?" "What?" exclaimed Nidaga. "You see the two, but do you not know that the man above is the king and the animal below is the elephant? Where's the use of talking to a man like you? Pray, be not impatient with an ignorant man like me," begged the rustic. "But you said above and below. What do you mean?" Nidaga could stand it no more. "You see the king and the elephant, and the one above and the other below. Yet you want to know what is meant by above and below?" burst out Nidaga. "If things seen and words spoken can convey so little to you, action alone can teach you. Bend forward and you will know it all too well." The rustic did as he was told. Nidaga got on his shoulders and said, "Know it now. I am above as the king, you are below as the elephant. Is that clear enough?" "No, not yet," was the rustic's quiet reply. You say you are above like the king, and I am below like the elephant. The king, the elephant, above and below. So far it is clear. But pray tell me what you mean by I and you. When Nidaga was thus confronted all of a sudden with the mighty problem of defining the you apart from the I, light dawned on his mind. At once he jumped down and fell at his master's feet, saying, "Who else but my venerable master, Ribu, could have thus drawn my mind from the superficialities of physical existence to the true being of the self? O benign master, I crave thy blessings. Therefore, while your aim is to transcend here and now these superficialities of physical existence through Atma Vichara, where is the scope for making the distinctions of you and I, which pertain only to the body? When you turn the mind within, seeking the source of thought, where is the you and where is the I? You should seek and be the self that includes all. But is it not funny that I should be searching for the I? Does not the inquiry, who am I, turn out in the end an empty formula? Or am I to put the question to myself endlessly, repeating it like some mantra? Self-inquiry is certainly not an empty formula. It is more than the repetition of any mantra. If the inquiry, who am I, were a mere mental questioning, it would not be of much value. The very purpose of self-inquiry is to focus the entire mind at its source. It is not, therefore, a case of I searching for another I. Much less is self-inquiry an empty formula, for it involves an intense activity of the entire mind to keep it steadily poised in pure self-awareness. Self-inquiry is the one infallible means, the only direct one, to realize the unconditioned, absolute being that you are. Why should self-inquiry alone be considered the direct means to jnana? Because every kind of sadhana except that of Atma Vichara presupposes the retention of the mind as the instrument for carrying on the sadhana, and without the mind it cannot be practiced. The ego may take different and subtler forms at the different stages of one's practice, but is itself never destroyed. When Janaka exclaimed, "Now I have discovered the thief who has been ruining me all along. He shall be dealt with summarily," the king was really referring to the ego or the mind. But the thief may well be apprehended by the other sadhanas as well. The attempt to destroy the ego or the mind through sadhanas other than Atma Vichara is just like the thief assuming the guise of a policeman to catch the thief, that is himself. Atma Vichara alone can reveal the truth that neither the ego nor the mind really exists, and enables one to realize the pure, undifferentiated being of the self, or the absolute. Having realized the self, nothing remains to be known, because it is perfect bliss. It is the all. In this life beset with limitations, can I ever realize the bliss of the self? That bliss of the self is always with you, and you will find it for yourself if you would seek it earnestly. The cause of your misery is not in the life without. It is in you as the ego. You impose limitations on yourself and then make a vain struggle to transcend them. All unhappiness is due to the ego. With it comes all your trouble. What does it avail you to attribute to the happenings in life the cause of misery which is really within you? What happiness can you get from things extraneous to yourself? When you get it, how long will it last? If you would deny the ego and scorch it by ignoring it, you would be free. If you accept it, it will impose limitations on you and throw you into a vain struggle to transcend them. That was how the thief sought to ruin King Janaka. To be the self that you really are is the only means to realize the bliss that is ever yours. Not having realized the truth that the self alone exists, should I not adopt bhakti and yoga margas as being more suitable for purposes of sadhana than vichara marga? Is not the realization of one's absolute being, that is, Brahma Jnana, something quite unattainable to a layman like me? Brahma Jnana is not a knowledge to be acquired, so that acquiring it one may obtain happiness. It is one's ignorant outlook that one should give up. The self you seek to know is verily yourself. Your supposed ignorance causes you needless grief, like that of the 10 foolish men who grieved the loss of the 10th man who was never lost. The 10 foolish men in the parable forded a stream and on reaching the other shore, wanted to make sure that all of them had in fact safely crossed the stream. One of the 10 began to count, but while counting others left himself out. "I see only 9. Sure enough, we have lost one. Who can it be?" he said. "Did you count correctly?" asked another, and did the counting himself, but he too counted only 9. One after the other, each of the 10 counted only 9, missing himself. "We are only 9, they all agreed. "But who is the missing one?" they asked themselves. Every effort they made to discover the missing individual failed. "Whoever he be that is drowned," said the most sentimental of 10 fools, "we have lost him." So saying, he burst into tears, and the rest of the 9 followed suit. Seeing them weeping on the river bank, a sympathetic wayfarer inquired for the cause. They related what had happened and said that even after counting themselves several times, they could find no more than 9. On hearing the story, but seeing all the 10 before him, the wayfarer guessed what had happened. In order to make them know for themselves that they were really 10, that all of them had come safe from the crossing, he told them, "Let each of you count for himself, but one after the other serially, 1, 2, 3, and so on, while I shall give you each a blow so that all of you may be sure of having been included in the count, and included only once. The 10th missing man will then be found." Hearing this, he rejoiced at the prospect of finding their lost comrade, and accepted the method suggested by the wayfarer. While the kind wayfarer gave a blow to each of the 10 in turn, he that got the blow counted himself aloud. 10, said the last man as he got the last blow in turn. Bewildered, they looked at one another. "We are 10, they said with one voice, and thanked the wayfarer for having removed their grief. That is the parable. From where was the 10th man brought in? Was he ever lost? By knowing that he had been there all the while, did they learn anything new? The cause of their grief was not the real loss of any one of the 10. It was their own ignorance, rather than their mere supposition that one of them was lost, though they could not find who he was, because they had counted only 9. Such is also the case with you. Truly, there is no cause for you to be miserable and unhappy. You yourself impose limitations on your true nature of infinite being, and then weep that you are but a finite creature. Then you take up this or that sadhana to transcend the non-existent limitations. But if your sadhana itself assumes the existence of the limitations, how can it help you to transcend them? Hence I say, know that you are really the infinite, pure being, the Self Absolute. You're always that self and nothing but that self. Therefore, you can never be really ignorant of the self. Your ignorance is merely a formal ignorance, like the ignorance of the 10 fools about the lost 10th man. It is this ignorance that causes them grief. Know then that true knowledge does not create a new being for you. It only removes your ignorant ignorance. Bliss is not added to your nature. It is merely revealed as your true and natural state, eternal and imperishable. The only way to be rid of your grief is to know and be the self. How can this be attainable? Sadhana and grace. Research on God has been going on from time immemorial. Has the final word been said? You're quiet. Should I consider Sri Bhagavan's silence as the reply to my question? Yes, Mauna is Ishvara Svarupa, hence the text. Buddha is said to have ignored such inquiries about God, and for this he was called a Sunyavadin, nihilist. In fact, Buddha concerned himself more with directing the seeker to realize bliss here and now than with academic discussions about God, etc. God is described as manifest and unmanifest. As the former, he is said to include the world as a part of his being. If that is so, we, as part of that world, should have easily known him in the manifested form. Know yourself before you seek to decide about the nature of God in the world. Does knowing myself imply knowing God? Yes, God is within you. Then what stands in the way of my knowing myself or God? Your wandering mind and perverted ways. Am I a weak creature? But why does not the superior power of the Lord within remove the obstacles? Yes, he will if you have the aspiration. Why should he not create the aspiration in me? Then surrender yourself. If I surrender myself, is there no prayer to God necessary? Surrender itself is a mighty prayer. But is it not necessary to understand his nature before one surrenders oneself? If you believe that God will do for you all the things you want him to do, then surrender yourself to him. Otherwise, let God alone and know yourself. Has God or the Guru any solicitude for me? If you seek either, they are not really two but one and identical. Rest assured that they are seeking you with a solicitude greater than you can ever imagine. Jesus gave the parable of the lost coin, wherein the woman searches for it till it is found. Yes, that aptly represents the truth that God or the Guru is always in search of the earnest seeker. With a coin, a dud piece, the woman would not have made that long search. Do you see what it means? The seeker must qualify himself through devotion, etc. But one may not be quite sure of God's grace. If the unripe mind does not feel his grace, it does not mean that God's grace is absent, for it would imply that God is at times not gracious, that is, ceases to be God. Is that the same thing as the saying of Christ, according to thy faith be it done unto thee? Quite so. The Upanishads say, I am told that he alone knows the Atman whom the Atman chooses. Why should the Atman choose at all? If it chooses, why some particular person? When the sun rises, some buds alone blossom, not all. Do you blame the sun for that? Nor can the bud blossom of itself. It requires the sunlight to do it. May we not say that the help of the Atman is needed because it is the Atman that drew over itself the veil of Maya? You may say so. If the Atman has drawn the veil over itself, should it not itself remove the veil? It will do so. See for whom is the veil. Why should I? Let the Atman itself remove the veil. If the Atman talks about the veil, then the Atman itself will remove it. Is God personal? Yes, He is always the first person, the I ever standing before you. Because you give precedence to worldly things, God appears to have receded to the background. If you will give up all else and seek Him alone, He alone will remain as the I, the Self. The final state of realization, according to Advaita, is said to be the absolute union with the divine, and according to Vishisadvaita, a qualified union, while Dvaita maintains that there is no union at all. Which of these should be considered the correct view? Why speculate as to what will happen sometime in the future? All are agreed that the I exists, to whichever school of thought he may belong. Let the earnest seeker first find out what the I is. Then it will be time enough to know what the final state will be, whether the I will get merged in the Supreme Being or stand apart from Him. Let us not forestall the conclusion, but keep an open mind. But will not some understanding of the final state be a helpful guide even to the aspirant? No purpose is served in trying to decide now what the final state of realization will be. It has no intrinsic value. Why so? Because you proceed on a wrong principle. Your ascertainment has to depend on the intellect which shines only by the light it derives from the Self. Is it not presumptuous on the part of the intellect to sit in judgment over that of which it is but a limited manifestation, and from which it derives its little light? How can the intellect, which can never reach the Self, be competent to ascertain and much less decide the nature of the final state of realization? It is like trying to measure the sunlight at its source by the standard of the light given by a candle. The wax will melt down before the candle comes anywhere near the sun. Instead of indulging in mere speculation, devote yourself here and now to the search for the truth that is ever within you. The jnani and the world. Is the world perceived by the jnani? From whom is the question? Is it from a jnani or a jnani? From an ajnani, I admit. Is it the world that seeks to decide the issue about its reality? The doubt arises in you. Know in the first instance who the doubter is, and then you may consider if the world is real or not. The ajnani sees and knows the world and its objects, which affect his senses of touch, taste, etc. Does the jnani experience the world in like manner? You talk of seeing and knowing the world, but without knowing yourself, the knowing subject, with whom there is no knowledge of the object. How can you know the true nature of the world, the known object? No doubt the objects affect the body and the sense organs, but is it to your body that the question arises? Does the body say, I feel the object, it is real? Or is it the world that says to you, I, the world, am real? I am only trying to understand the jnani's point of view about the world. Is the world perceived after self-realization? Why worry yourself about the world and what happens to it after self-realization? First realize the Self. What does it matter if the world is perceived or not? Do you gain anything to help you in your quest by the non-perception of the world during sleep? Conversely, what would you lose now by the perception of the world? It is quite immaterial to the jnani or ajnani if he perceives the world or not. It is seen by both, but their viewpoints differ. If the jnani and the ajnani perceive the world in like manner, where is the difference between them? Seeing the world, the jnani sees the self, which is the substratum of all that is seen. The ajnani, whether he sees the world or not, is ignorant of his true being, the self. Take the instance of moving pictures on the screen in the cinema show. What is there in front of you before the play begins? Merely the screen. On that screen you see the entire show, and for all appearances the pictures are real. But go and try to take hold of them. What do you take hold of? Merely the screen on which the pictures appeared so real. After the play, when the pictures disappear, what remains? The screen again. So with the self. That alone exists. The picture comes and goes. If you hold on to the self, you will not be deceived by the appearance of the pictures. Nor does it matter at all if the pictures appear or disappear. Ignoring the self, the ajnani thinks the world is real. Just as ignoring the screen, he sees merely the pictures, as if they existed apart from it. If one knows that without the seer there is nothing to be seen, just as there are no pictures without the screen, one is not deluded. The jnani knows that the screen, the pictures, and the sight thereof are but the self. With the pictures, the self is in its manifest form. Without the pictures, it remains in the unmanifest form. To the jnani, it is quite immaterial if the self is in the one form or the other. He is always the self. But the ajnani, seeing the jnani active, gets confounded. It is just that point that prompted me to put my first question, whether one who has realized the self perceives the world as we do, and if he does, I should like to know how Sri Bhagavan felt about the mysterious disappearance of the photo yesterday. You are referring to the photo of the Madurai temple. A few minutes earlier it was passing through the hands of the visitors, who looked at it in turn. Evidently it was mislaid among the pages of some book or other they were consulting. Yes, it was that incident, but how does Bhagavan view it? There was anxious search for the photo, which in the end could not be found. How does Bhagavan view the mysterious disappearance of the photo just at the moment when it was wanted? Suppose you dream that you are taking me to your distant country, Poland. You wake up and ask me, so I dreamt so-and-so. Did you also have some such dream or know in some other way that I was taking you to Poland? What significance will you attach to such an inquiry? But with regard to the missing photo, the whole incident took place in front of Sri Bhagavan. The seeing of the photo, its disappearance as well as your present inquiry, are all mere workings of the mind. There is a Puranic story which illustrates the point. When Sita was missing from the forest hermitage, Rama went about in search of her, wailing, "Oh, Sita!" It is said that Parvati and Parameshwara saw from above what was taking place in the forest. Parvati expressed her surprise to Shiva and said, "You promised Rama as the perfect being. See how he behaves and grieves at the loss of Sita?" Shiva replied, "If you are skeptical about Rama's perfection, then put him to the test yourself. Through your yoga maya, transform yourself into the likeness of Sita and appear before him." Parvati did so. She appeared before Rama in the very likeness of Sita, but to her astonishment Rama ignored her presence and went on as before, calling out, "O Sita, O Sita," as if he were blind. I am unable to grasp the moral of the story. If Rama were really searching for the bodily presence of Sita, he would have recognized the person who was standing in front of himself as Sita he had lost. But no, the missing Sita was just as unreal as the Sita that appeared before his eyes. Rama was not really blind, but to Rama the Jnani, the prior being of Sita in the hermitage, her disappearance, his consequent search for her, as well as the actual presence of Parvati in the guise of Sita, were all equally unreal. Do you now understand how the missing photo was viewed? I cannot say it is at all clear to me. Is the world that is seen, felt, and sensed by us in so many ways something like a dream, an illusion? There is no alternative for you but to accept the world as unreal if you are seeking the truth and the truth alone. Why so? For the simple reason that unless you give up the idea that the world is real, your mind will always be after it. If you take the appearance to be real, you will never know the real itself, although it is the real alone that exists. This point is illustrated by the analogy of the snake and the rope. As long as you see the snake, you cannot see the rope as such. The non-existent snake becomes real to you, while the real rope seems wholly non-existent as such. It is easy to accept tentatively that the world is not ultimately real, but it is hard to have the conviction that it is really unreal. Even so, is your dream world real when you are dreaming? So long as the dream lasts, everything you see, feel, etc. therein is real. Is then the world nothing better than a dream? What is wrong with the sense of reality you have while you are dreaming? You may be dreaming of something quite impossible, for instance, of having a happy chat with a dead person. Just for a moment you may doubt in the dream, saying to yourself, was he not dead? But somehow your mind reconciles itself to the dream vision, and the person is as good as alive for the purposes of the dream. In other words, the dream as a dream does not permit you to doubt its reality. Even so, you are unable to doubt the reality of the world of your wakeful experience. How can the mind which has itself created the world accept it as unreal? That is the significance of the comparison between the world of wakeful experience and the dream world. Both are but creations of the mind, and so long as the mind is engrossed in either, it finds itself unable to deny the reality of the dream world while dreaming and of the waking world while awake. If, on the contrary, you withdraw your mind completely from the world and turn it within and abide thus, that is, if you keep awake always to the self, which is the substratum of all experience, you will find the world of which you alone are now aware, just as unreal as the world in which you lived in your dream. As I said before, we see, feel, and sense the world in so many ways. These sensations are the reactions to the objects seen, felt, etc., and are not mental creations as in dreams, which differ not only from person to person, but also with regard to the same person. Is that not enough to prove the objective reality of the world? All this talk about inconsistencies and their attribution to the dream world arises only now, when you are awake. While you are dreaming, the dream was a perfectly integrated whole. That is to say that if you felt thirsty in a dream, the illusory drinking of illusory water did quench your illusory thirst. But all this was real and not illusory to you so long as you did not know that the dream itself was illusory. Similarly, with the waking world, and the sensations you now have get coordinated to give you the impression that the world is real. If, on the contrary, the world is a self-existent reality, that is what you evidently mean by its objectivity. What prevents the world from revealing itself to you in sleep? You do not say you have not existed in your sleep. Neither do I deny the world's existence while I am asleep. It has been existing all the while. If during my sleep I did not see it, others who are not sleeping saw it. To say you existed while asleep, was it necessary to call in the evidence of others so as to prove it to you? Why do you seek their evidence now? Those others can tell you of having seen the world during your sleep only when you yourself are awake. With regard to your own existence, it is different. On waking up, you say you had a sound sleep, so that to that extent, you are aware of yourself in the deepest sleep, whereas you have not the slightest notion of the world's existence then. Even now, while you are awake, is it the world that says I am real, or is it you? Of course, I say it, but I say it of the world. Well, then, that world which you say is real is really mocking at you for seeking to prove its reality, while of your own reality you are ignorant. You want somehow or other to maintain that the world is real. What is the standard of reality? That alone is real which exists by itself, which reveals itself by itself, and which is eternal and unchanging. Does the world exist by itself? Was it ever seen without the aid of the mind? In sleep is there neither mind nor world? When awake, there is the mind and there is the world. What does this invariable concomitance mean? You are familiar with the principles of inductive logic, which are considered the very basis of scientific investigation. Why do you not decide this question of the reality of the world in the light of those accepted principles of logic? Of yourself, you can say, I exist. That is, yours is not mere existence. It is existence of which you are conscious. Really, it is existence identical with consciousness. The world may not be conscious of itself, yet it exists. Consciousness is always self-consciousness. If you are conscious of anything, you are essentially conscious of yourself. On-self-consciousness existence is a contradiction in terms. It is no existence at all. It is merely attributed existence. Whereas true existence, the Sat, is not an attribute, it is the substance itself. It is the Vastu. Reality is therefore known as Sat Chit, being consciousness, and never merely the one to the exclusion of the other. The world neither exists by itself, nor is it conscious of its existence. How can you say that such a world is real? And what is the nature of the world? It is perpetual change, a continuous, interminable flux. A dependent, unself-conscious, ever-changing world cannot be real. Not only does Western empirical science consider the world real, but the Vedas, etc., give elaborate cosmological descriptions of the world and its origin. Why should they do so if the world is unreal? The essential purpose of the Vedas, etc., is to teach you the nature of the imperishable Atman, and to declare with authority, Thou art that. I accept, but why should they give cosmological descriptions spun out at great length unless they consider the world real? Adopt in practice what you accept in theory, and leave the rest. The Shastras have to guide every type of seeker after truth, and all are not of the same mental makeup. What you cannot accept, treat as artha vada, or auxiliary argument. Note, in the last analysis, the world of sense perception resolves itself into the two categories of time and space. And here is what Sir James Jeans writes in his book, The New Background of Science, as the conclusion drawn from experiments based on Einstein's theory of relativity. We find that space means nothing apart from our perception of objects, and time means nothing apart from our experience of events. Space begins to appear merely as a fiction created by our minds. Our physical bodies are merely things in space, an illegitimate extension to nature of a subjective concept which helps us to understand and describe the arrangement of objects as seen by us, while the time appears as a second fiction. Without the past and the future, time, as generally conceived, is but a myth, serving a similar purpose for the arrangement of events which happen to us. The reader should note that when time and space are considered by modern science as mere fictions created by our own minds, objects and events become ipso facto mere creations of the mind, because they cannot be without time and space. As to the solidity attributed by the layman to matter, the following conclusions drawn from modern experimental physics furnish the answer. 1. Science knows nothing about the real nature of the constituents of the atom. It knows only the radiations that come out of it, but never the source itself. 2. Since the atom continually radiates energy, the electron at one time can never be identified with the electron at another time. 3. The electron ceases altogether to have the properties of a thing as conceived by common sense. It is merely a region from which energy may radiate. Outline of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. The following is the conclusion Bertrand Russell draws. Now, owing chiefly to two German physicists, Heisenberg and Schrödinger, the last vestiges of the old solid atom have melted away. Matter has become as ghostly as anything in a spiritualist seance. Let the reader now judge for himself in what way the waking world of sense perception is fundamentally different from the dream world, reminding himself of what has been stated above in the body of the chapter and of the following from Who Am I, except that the wakeful state is long and the dream state is short. There is no difference between the two. This truth, echoed by modern science, is expressed by Dr. Eddington thus: the frank realization that physical science is concerned with the world of shadows is one of the most significant advances. In the world of physics, we watch a shadowgraph performance of the drama of familiar life. The picture show on the screen, as Sri Bhagavan calls it. The shadow of my elbow rests on the shadow table as the shadow ink flows over shadow paper.